we got it down to one button that I need to push, so we're in good shape. Thank you. It's wonderful to see that science can come to grips with problems like this. You just have to wait 65 years, which is what happened to me. You can see my hair was a different color at the beginning. It's always a bit nostalgic for me to come back to the farm here. I spent nearly 4 years on this campus, first in the Computation Center, which was a couple of years ahead of IBM in system development, and later at the Institute for Plasma Research under Professor Peter Sturrock, developing models of the solar corona, pulsar energy, and unidentified flying objects. The year was 1972, and it was already clear, at least to us, that these three cosmic subjects had a lot in common. I have 4 things to say. Here you see President Clinton having a private talk with his science advisor from 93 to 98, Professor Jacques Gibbons, an astrophysicist and atomist specialized in the structure of the sun and energy conservation, which is what got him the job. He held this prestigious position at the time when Mr. Lawrence Rockefeller, well-known supporter of American science and the environment, strongly suggested to President Clinton to remove the secrecy and the stigma that surrounded the UFO issue in the US. The problem was a scientific one, but it was mainly political. And as we all know, the secret was not lifted. In February '94, I had the opportunity to listen to Professor Gibbons at the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in this city, in San Francisco, where I was part of a panel about the use of computer networking and the management of crises in industrial and environmental issues. He presented, Dr. Gibbons presented the keynote address and gracefully took questions afterwards. Of course, someone from the audience asked him, how do you advise the President of the United States when Mr. Rockefeller wants him to reveal once and for all the reality of unexplained objects in the planet's neighborhood? There were a few laughs in the audience, followed by deep and silent expectation. Dr. Gibbons picked up the mic and said he could not answer in place of the White House, but he could tell a short story that would summarize his personal situation. And I'll mention that because it's now our personal situation here. It's about an older man who is tired and goes home one evening. In the grass along the way, he detects an unusual light. As he gets closer, he discovers a frog with the odd detail that it wears a little lighted golden crown. So he's intrigued by that discovery, and he picks up the frog. And he's about to put it in his pocket when it starts talking to him. The frog, this was at AAAS in San Francisco in front of all the scientists in the Bay Area, okay? So the frog explains that in reality, she is a young, very wealthy princess, changed into a frog by a mean magician, and all he has to do is to kiss her. She will become human again. They will live together in happiness, and they will have many wonderful children. The old man ponders the situation seriously for a while, and then he puts her in his pocket, saying, at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog. That's funny, but it's also the most clear explanation I've ever heard at the highest level regarding the historical status of the UFO problem in the United States. Remember, this is the advisor, the science advisor to the president. Second thing I have to mention is when I joined this wonderful campus, I was hired to develop a generalized database system for the campus and the medical school. And I took the opportunity, since I had the computer, to implement catalogs of unexplained UFO cases. Again, this was 1973. And we developed a screen to separate the most interesting cases from those that were likely to be explainable, which is the first thing you do in science. You clean up the data. Here, by the way, you'll see some of the pioneers of this discipline, from left to right: Dr. James Harder, University of California, Berkeley; Dr. Richard Haynes of NASA; Mr. Brad Sparks, an individual researcher; myself with black hair; Dr. Bruce Maccabee from the US Navy; and Professor Sturrock, who is still very much alive and lives here in Palo Alto. And he was, again, the first man who initiated UFO research at Stanford. At the time, the French space agency, the CNES, which, by the way, is the third wealthiest space agency in the world. They own the Kourou base on the equator, so they are the only ones who can launch from the equator, which is obviously a big advantage in launching satellites, especially heavy satellites. They launched the Kepler telescope from Kourou. So the CNES had an interest in the same issue, and they were talking about a useful sample after cleaning the data of 5% to 10% of the cases. The remaining ones being explained or too poor in terms of information content. As we all know, thanks to the efforts of the CNES, the percentage has now fallen to 2% of the data. That's valuable data for scientists. After deeper analysis of exceptional optical effects, observation errors, and the influence of witness imagination. Back here in California, our little group included a retired Army officer. About 1943, he told us he used to be in charge of surveying and detecting German submarines along the northeast coast of the United States, in the general area of Massachusetts. His unit had studied the complexity of statistics, and he strongly disagreed with us. He strongly stated that ufologists had the problem backward. In his position, if 2% of the reported cases turned out to be German subs, the situation was very serious indeed for the United States. Therefore, he encouraged me to apply to UFOs the same discipline that the Army had applied to the detection of enemy periscopes in the waves of the North Atlantic. That changed a lot of things for me. He told me something like this: you're doing scientific research, therefore, if you have explained 98% of the reports, you're happy. They all cost the same amount, pretty much, and you believe you solved the problem. And if you remember, for many years during Project Blue Book, the Air Force was sending a report to Congress saying, again, this year, we have explained all but 2% of all the reports coming from the American people. And everybody applauded, and everybody went back to doing something else. He said, my own job was intelligence. My problem was exactly the reverse of yours. The 98% explainable cases have probably been given to me by the enemy, and they all cost the same. The remaining 2% could kill me, and they will cost a lot more. And detecting them, you know, is going to be difficult. That's where we are. I never forgot that lesson. When government services announced today that the great majority of the reports are explained, as we saw recently from before Congress, that simply means for an information guy like me that the input is very poorly controlled. What's important is the remaining 2%. My third thing I need to get into is this. In the days when Madame Curie was trying to characterize the unexplained radiation sources within pitchblende, which is a completely uninteresting material, she only obtained 1/10 of a gram of radium chloride for several tons of raw material. Tons. That 1/10 of gram became her second Nobel Prize. The scientific and strategic issue posed by UFOs cannot be left unanswered indefinitely. Not only are ordinary citizens reporting personal observations with increasingly precise parameters, but since the last few years, defense services have been equipped with modern systems that enable correlations, as we saw before, between space, the atmosphere, and the surface of our planet. That constitutes a new situation. It's no longer possible to speculate about hypothetical illusions, errors, or hallucinations. Back in France, the services of the CNES can now correlate witness observations with precise weather measurements at the time, data from the military, space observations, and local airports, which are now equipped with pretty interesting atmospheric monitoring system. The same is true in the US, as we saw in an impressive number of measurements by aircraft equipped with electronic and optical detectors, invisible and infrared light. These observations lasted dozens of minutes and hours, allowing very precise data gathering. Let me get to my last section, and it's the only one that has a curve, a graph. So after all, this is Stanford. I have to have at least one graph, you know, after what Dr. Nolan showed, you know, was kind of overwhelming. So this is not overwhelming, but it's interesting. Why is it that the phenomenon remains so mysterious, 65 years, for much of the public and even for the Pentagon? I'm not breaching any security here, but I'm pretty sure that the Pentagon has no idea what's really going on at the scale that we're addressing here. The answer lies in a very statistical effect that you can see here that's very often neglected. The graph can be read in the following way. The probability that an observer will be motivated, after all, to get a report, somebody has to have a motivation to send a report to you. Okay? We assume people will always do that because they want their name in the paper and so on. That's not true. And the probability that the observer is going to be motivated to send this report depends on the strangeness of the experience, which is the horizontal scale here. And this is somewhat arbitrary. I mean, admittedly, I made it up, but it's, you know, it will correlate with your data if you try. You may have a different scale. The strangeness is defined by a graph represented with two steep hills, not one. There isn't one distribution. There are at least two distributions, which is a mistake that we're making when we go testify before Congress. There are two different distributions, and they are very, very, very different. In strangeness category 1, the witness may have observed an unusual light in the sky, or at ground level, which behaved in some curious way. It's unlikely they would call authorities, but the sighting may become known, especially if there is an unusual physiological reaction at the same time or some other incident. You would find those in the files of the Air Force, which I spent 4 years going through one by one in the old days. In strangeness category 2, the object is better defined, like a luminous body with complex shapes or displacement. We've mentioned some of them, you know, this morning, or a sphere in the sky that appears to fly against the wind. Sometimes it's a definite, silent, steady light that was extinguished suddenly and therefore couldn't have been an artificial satellite. Well, those cases go to official organizations that are trusted. I've assumed that maybe 3 people out of 10 would report something if it was in some ways touching them personally. For example, if they had some reaction to it. In my early days at Paris Observatory, we were responsible as public servants for answering and trying to explain reports that the French people were sending us. And we had to do that because artificial satellites were going to be very important. And there was a tremendous education program to do with the population. Many people thought it was Soviet propaganda, and there was no such thing. When you look at the sky, you don't see a satellite most of the time. So we were assigned during the day. During the night, we would observe, and during the day, we would answer letters from people. Some of those remained unexplained. The satellite that disappears right in the middle of the sky is simply because it went into the shade of the Earth, the cone of the shade of the Earth. People don't know that. So they see a light that goes like this and poof, it disappears, which seems mysterious. Those things are explainable, and people are very grateful when you explain that. Everything changes in category 3. The motivation is urgent. People will call the Air Force, and they will call the Army, they will call the police. Like an orange globe has followed your car on some isolated road. A luminous object like an airplane on fire seems to have crashed behind the next hill. The light has been diving on an isolated car, and the engine died at the same time. A flotilla of lights has slowly crossed the sky, leaving a trail, or a flying cylinder with no wings has buzzed somebody's aircraft carrier. The public is troubled by these observations, so are the people on the aircraft carrier, which don't have an immediate explanation. We find them in police reports, and in previous cases, they may be explainable, but they fill the official files and often end up in the records of concerned agency like the CNES in France, or a local air base in the US, or now the Pentagon. If any, some fall to civilian services, military units and radar stations. Investigators review the data, talk to pilots, talk to technical organizations in the area. So that's the Black Hill. You see report number 1, report number 2, report number 3, and so on. If an object overcomes a car and lands on the road ahead of you, and then takes off again, we're in strangeness category 4. The report may not go to the Air Force. It might go to the local police, probably. In many cases, it goes to a local journalist, you know, or to an independent researcher. Or in most cases, there is no report because you're afraid that people will make fun of you or the reputation of your company will be, you know. You would be surprised the number of CEOs within 10 miles of Stanford, you know, who know me as a venture capitalist have come to me to talk to me about something like this, was never reported. In strangeness category 5, everything becomes even more scary. The probability of any official report is almost 0. Perhaps a creature has come out of the object that was in front of your car. Perhaps witnesses felt a form of communication with whatever it was, or even a physiological reaction, such as temporary paralysis. So we have many cases of that, hundreds. Such cases have filled my files over the years. And I don't need permission of Congress to study them. I just call the guy and, you know, if I'm lucky, he gives me a cup of coffee and we talk about his experience. I mean, there is no official anything. Experienced ufologists will tell you there's a category 6 and a category 7. The red curve, again, that are very seldom considered by the police, the army, or the serious news organizations because they are weird, and they're also high in number and rich in content. No witness wants to be exposed as a crazy person by some scientist, journalist, or law officer, yet these reports are often correlated to physical observations that are quite real. Category 7, one would place reports of what people have called abductions, for lack of a better term, and the probability of an official report is very low. One is back to what sociologist Pierre Lagrange in France has called the rumor. There is a rumor about these things, but it's difficult to pinpoint specific cases. And even that assumes that the unconscious mind has reported it to the conscious mind. And hypnosis is not going to get you there, contrary to what my friends in ufology believe. So there are two conclusions that can be drawn from our curve with the two hills. Current analysis methods are insufficient, even blind, before most of the reports, and those reports themselves derive from an unknown and large number of observations by the public, because this is out of 10 observations, and I've just estimated the height of the curve that is a report. Military analyses are highly relevant. They teach us a lot, but only in a minority of sightings in the United States. Namely, the classic cases available to very specialized equipment, like aboard the Nimitz or the ship that followed the Nimitz. When we're told that 2% or 3% of the cases remain unexplained after serious study, you must relate these figures to the estimated number of observations that were not reported. And you have to ask, why were they not reported? How many are there? The official services do work on an important sample, but it's limited by severe selection parameters, which restrict the scope of their conclusions, a situation which is well understood by modern science. In practice, in medicine, for example, you would never release a new drug that had only been tested on a small statistical sample in one country. I see a serious danger in any future response to the phenomenon based on media revelations or on a social disclosure attempt. There are many definitions of disclosure that would present it as a grave and present danger without due attention to the more subtle categories in our data space. It has to be a danger if you are looking for funding from the military. I mean, that's what they deal with. If it's not dangerous, they'll cut your funding, which occasionally happens to us. It is true that we suffer from almost a century of neglect and ignorance, but this will not be correlated by or corrected by overreacting to the present or potential danger that our own ignorance has created. Nor will it be corrected by simply dumping all the files into some AI engine. My Ph.D. is in AI, 1968, Northwestern. AI has been along all the time. It's in factories, it's in your car, it's everywhere. What the AI that people are talking about now is the latest version of AI, which faces the public. Everything else works, I mean. But it doesn't work on files where you cannot even define what the problem is. We need to apply AI at the level where we have already done serious investigation with boots on the ground to clean up the sample. The real solution lies in the more subtle data categories, those we have neglected all along, 5, 6, and 7. And in the future, that's where I want to spend most of my time. In conclusion, trying to separate science from the evolution of society has always been a futile exercise. Early in this presentation, we noted that the probability of a UFO or UAP, maybe, report varied with strangeness. It's highest when the case is clearly abnormal and observed under good conditions, but doesn't threaten the witness's emotional stability. In contrast, the strange observations, those of the highest potential scientific interest, only reach official services by accident and are difficult to analyze and poorly socialized. We don't have a good enough picture of their global characteristics. We know the US, we know France. You know, what do we know about India? What do we know about Afghanistan? We don't have a good enough picture, and we cannot obtain it by looking at the official records, secret or not. Among concerned services, military authorities are in a position that is better defined, but more isolated from the deeper social reality. Their equipment provides the best quality of technical data, but it only addresses specific domains that don't reveal the global picture that we need. In particular, they treat any anomaly as a potential threat to be extinguished, rather than an opportunity to be observed, analyzed, and recorded. The Raytheon Corporation wrote a very interesting memo, which was not classified, to the US Navy after the episode of the Nimitz, and I will paraphrase what they said. They said, do not ascribe to our infrared cameras what they cannot tell you. Everybody has assumed those were photographs. Those are not photographs. Those are detection of a heat response, okay? Those are infrared cameras. They are very large. They are under the wing of the aircraft, and they can track the target. What you bought from us was a specific system that you asked for us to develop that records the heat signature of the engines of an enemy airplane you're going to attack. We didn't sell you a UFO detector. Okay, that's Raytheon writing to the US Navy. The real danger lies in the lack of a wider research program, one more fundamental and more accessible, addressing the life sciences and social realities, as well as physical performance and military threats. Beyond the justifiable protection of a few secret projects, the time has come for major countries, not just one, to open the real files widely to the scientific community. Thank you.